professor of economics at the University of San Francisco. About 10 years ago, I stumbled upon a book titled The Woman That Never Evolved, and that caught my attention. It was written by a primatologist and an anthropologist, Sarah Blaffer-Hardy, and it was challenging the notion that was widely held by many in biology and in the social sciences, that females across species were less competitive than male, were less interested in getting resources, less interested in reaching high status. And this idea, where did it come from? It originated with Darwin. Darwin, while he was developing his theories of evolution by natural selection, used to say that he had nightmares about the peacock train, those beautiful colors that the peacock have and female do not, or the horns of stags and many other males in the animal kingdom, because he was thinking all these beautiful appendages, they are really a liability when it comes to running away from predators. And so why are they there? Isn't it define the concept itself of natural selection? He was a man of the Victorian era, therefore it took him some time to think about that maybe there isn't just natural selection. What if all these things were actually useful to do another very important things in life, which is getting a mate, attracting a mate. And so it was born the idea of sexual selection. And according to these ideas, according to Darwin, we see that many of these things are all male. Male tend to be stronger, tend to have horns, beard, unibrow, all things that are very good for male-male competition. And again, according to the first evolutionist, competition was mostly male, because male-male competition could gain as many females as they want. Male can have an infinite number of offspring if they want, while female do not. Across species, really, there is a limited number of offspring and children that female can have. And so this notion was born. And this notion stuck around for 100 years and even more. Why was it so important? Why did it strike a chord, that book, with me? Because it was exactly the same concept that behavioral economists were advancing to explain the many societal gap that we observe. We know that women are underrepresented in managerial positions. In the S&P 500 company, only 5% of the CEO are women. We know, we are probably all aware of the gender pay gap, according to which even for the same profession, women per dollar get paid less than men. So even once we include discrimination, different experience, different choice of college, once we include all of this traditional explanation for why there could be this gap, there is a part that was just not explained. And that's where economists started to say, well, it's question of choice. Women are not just as competitive as the men. They are not just as go-getters. If they are in a competitive situation, they are not going to increase their performance like men do. And when they're in a choice, they are not going to enter in a competitive environment like men would do. And if you think, oh, this is all a bunch of nonsense, trust me, I just put down a few of the papers. There are by now close probably to 100 papers that show with data, using data from the laboratory, making people play game, like I do, this is my method of doing research, that really show that indeed, when we make people play certain game, men show up, result more competitive than women. So, back to the book, I said, well, if she looked at the female in the primate world, langur monkeys and apes and gorillas and chimpanzees and bonobos, and showed that there are so many other strategies that we were not just looking. Darwin and the other evolutionists were looking at the more open way in which individual can compete, but there are other ways. hidden, very strategic, that they are no less of an indication of competitiveness than the former ones. So I started to dig into this literature, and I found that, well, even for women, reaching the top is actually very beneficial. Before we thought it was not, but it actually is, because across, even nowadays, among individuals living in hunter-gatherer situation, various tribes that we have in all the continents, we see that those that are at the top of the social scale, they have children that survive and thrive. So the benefit of wanting to reach the top are there for women as much as for men. The difference is that women cannot do it as physically as the male, because for 100,000 years, the time during which our mind evolved, the death of a mother would mean almost for sure the death of her children, not so for the father. So women had to evolve other strategies to get competitive that wouldn't also bring about a reaction from the other, or losing the cooperation and the help. Ultimately, for women, throughout the Pleistocene until today, what was the most important resource necessary to carry out the business of making sure that life would continue? Elicit the support of others, eliciting the support of the other women that would provide resources in time of need, help. And we all know through experiment that the women that reach high status and power and resources, if they really push it and they are less egalitarian with the other, they really alienate the support of the other women. And also, we see that women that reach the top have consequences they pay at the household level. For example, among the actresses, the one that win the Oscar as Best Actress, they get divorced at a much higher rate than the men. So for women, there are costs also to reaching the top. Therefore, I said, well, what if it is then that also for women, exactly like the female primate, they are competitive, they want to reach the top, but they just do it differently. I started to design experiment. This is what I do as an experimental economist. I make people play game. And in these particular games, I wanted to include the fact that by suppressing the competition, women might not feel the backlash from others. So I created game that hid competition under other frames. In a first series of experiments that I conducted with Jane Zhang at the University of New South Wales, we replicated the exact same experiment that I'm going to show you in a moment using cash, which is the traditional reward in a laboratory experiment, but it is also the traditional object of male-male competition in many societies across the world. And we said to our subject, well, in this particular part of the game, instead of being paid in cash, you are going to be given a prize that's going to benefit your children. It's still competition, but it's not competition for you. It's competition for your children. We play this game with parents and with parents. I send students in many different countries to see the effect of culture, because now we know it's not nature or nurture, it's both. Nature and nurture, their interplay brings about and affects our behavior. So, how is the game? The game is very simple. The game is adding up 5-digit number. If you were a subject in my lab, you would have to do this addition. I would give you 3 minutes, and we would do this game in 4 rounds. Each time, I change the way in which I pay. In round 1, I'm going to give you a sure $1 per correct answer. This is called the piece rate payment. In round 2, I force everyone to compete. I match randomly and anonymously the subject, and only the one that solves more addition is the winner. The winner is going to get twice as much, $2 per correct answer, and the other one is going to get nothing. And now the real experiment begins in round 3. And in round 3 we ask, so what do you want to be paid for the next round? The $1 per correct answer, the safe one, or do you want to enter the competition where there are big winner and big loser? And here is where we are going to see, as you see in the result, that male really thrive. They enjoy the competition, they increase their performance, and they want to enter the competition significantly more than the female. But then there is another round, the new treatment, the one in which we ask, so what do you want to do for next round? Do you want to be paid $1 or $2 only if you are the winner? But whatever you win, we are not going to give it to you in cash, we're going to give it to you as a bookstore voucher, for example, and you can buy books for your children. Or it can be, depending on the country, you can buy a uniform for your kid to go to school. It can be anything, but it really frames the competition as something beneficial for your children. So here are the results. On the left, in this series of graphs, you are going to see the traditional experiment when we pay people cash. The blue bar represents the percentage of men that prefer to compete, and the red bar, the percentage of females to prefer to compete. And what do you notice? That paying cash, there is a big and significant gap, difference between male and female. And if I stop there, it would be the 101 experiment that shows that men are more competitive than women. Except that, changing the game a little bit, in this case changing the reward, look what happens to the graph on the right. You see that using voucher and rewards, there is whatsoever zero difference in their desire to compete. So you cannot say that women are less competitive than men. They just do it differently. They are stimulated by other rewards and by other things. Across the world, we went to Togo, which is a small country in Western Africa, very interesting, and you will see in a second why. Across the general population, we find the same gender gap in the desire to compete, big gap on the left, and when we pay with voucher, these parents, the gap shrinks, diminishes to less than half, and becomes statistically insignificant. And then, I could do it because one of my students was part of a very important active group called the Nana Bands. The Nana Bands are the fabled women trader of Western Africa, the only one that trade those beautiful textile and colorful print that the women throughout Africa wear. And for them, there is no backlash from other female or from male, from being competitive, from being very clever in their business, from being aggressive doing business, from taking risk. And what do our experiments show? Whether we use cash or a voucher, the gap is the opposite way. Women are more competitive than men. So culture does matter, and culture is something that we can change. Again, Sierra Leone among parents, same things. With cash on the left, big gap, different types of prizes for the children or for gender typical, the gaps goes away. In Bosnia, among non-parents don't have children, so we did rewards that were gender typical, like makeup and skincare for the women, and soccer ball and soccer t-shirts for the male. And again, while at the beginning in the first two graphs the gap is significant, when we use the gender typical prices, the gaps is reduced almost in half and becomes borderline significant. And then there are cultures like Colombia, in which it looks like there is a gap, but it's not significant, it's not really there, neither with cash nor with a price or a voucher. So, after this first series of experiments, we said, what about, instead of framing the competition differently, because clearly people on a job, they are going to get paid in cash, what about if we change a little bit the way in which we give the rewards and we add a pro-social option? Meaning that in the new treatment, we tell our subject, if you are the winner, you could, if you want, share something with the loser. So there is competition, but it is coupled with cooperation. And we could measure competitiveness both as performance. When we force everyone to compete, we measure how well they perform. And we can measure competitiveness as a choice of entry in a competitive environment. The game was very similar. Instead of an addition, we had subject match numbers to make it a little bit more difficult and interesting. And we had people being in groups of 4. The top 2 were the winners, and they won $6 cash. In the traditional experiment, the winner takes it all. And in the new pro-social experiment, the 2 winners could share, if they wanted to, some of the $6 with the loser. And what did the result show? That there is a gap of 26% when I pay cash and there is no option of sharing. But the moment we tell the subject, at the end, if you want, you could share, we have the women perform in a competitive situation significantly more, and the gap vanishes. And here we go when it comes to choice of entry in a competitive environment. In the baseline treatment, without pro-sociality option, again we replicate the same gap. But the moment we give the pro-sociality option, men stay the same. Also men appreciate the opportunity to be cooperative. But women become twice as much competitive. So, in conclusion, women can be as competitive as men. It all depends from what we expect to see. Theory really shapes what we see in nature, in fields, in the lab. If we expect women not to be competitive, we're always going to design games and show with data that it is like that. But what if we start to include in the games what matter to women? All of a sudden, we see that women's behavior does change. And using this gender stereotype that women are less competitive is costly, both to the individual women, because we're going to observe discrimination, but also to society, because we're going to see loss of welfare by not employing these high-ability women. So, in conclusion, change the system, not the women. Do you want to close the gaps in society? Make remuneration a little bit less unequal, like team bonuses instead of individual bonuses. Put flexibility in the work schedule so that you allow women to do also their other job. And at the very end, if you want to go to the bookstore and take all the self-help manual, lean in, speak up, bargain for more, by all means, do it. But I don't think is that by making women behave like men, we are going to successfully close the gap in society. Thank you for listening.